Well, good Saturday morning. Welcome to episode 261 of Hobby Hotline. I feel a little inferior on the guest list today, but we have Dr. James Beckett from Sports Card Insights. How you doing, Dr. Beckett?
I'm great, Danny. Sound like this is going to be dueling questions with you and me and some other people taking shots until Rich gets here.
Well, that's what I said. Between you and Rich, I'm the Ernie Johnson just throwing the Hall of Famers today. So
I think
uh,
Ernie is an absolute all-star.
that's I couldn't agree more. Which is
The
why
hardest job, managing the gigantic egos.
right. This is how.
Not today, though, Danny. You won't have that problem with Rich and me.
No, not at all. But this is how I feel. Ruben, good to see you. The legend in the house. Oh, and Danny too. Yes. Um, and let's just get all our good mornings in. Hello, THA Card Story. Good morning, Chris Ramsey. We got a lot of people in the house. Clean cheap shots. Philly Joe. Well, guys, if I didn't get to you, I apologize, but we got a lot of news this week. So we're not going to do a national recap. We're not going to do a preview of Cleveland and tell you to wear comfortable shoes. We actually have news in the hobby this week. Um, I guess we might as well start at the beginning of the week and just go in chronological order. I don't know how else to attack all this, but Monday night news drops that the NFL Players Association is revoking their license from Panini and immediately transferring it to Fanatics, which is an interesting move. And there's some legal reasons where they may or may not be able to do this, and it'll head to court. And of course, immediately, there's still lawsuits between Panini and Fanatics. Dr. Beckett, that's a lot going on. From the 40,000 foot view, just from the hobby changing licenses, and in the past, this has happened. Where are we kind of right now?
Well, 19 years ago, I was kind of in the crosshairs of the Players Association, more baseball in those days with what was going on, and they're formidable. They the players associations have much more of a sense of urgency than the leagues do because players have shorter careers, especially in football, and so they don't dilly dally. They're very clear about what they want to do. They their license is required, and seemingly Panini had done right by them, but for whatever reason, they have moved very quickly, as is their maybe not their right, but their their past. That's what they've done, and maybe this is just to get it into arbitration or some kind of litigation, but their time's a wasting for the NFLPA. So I feel bad for Panini. It doesn't seem fair to me. I don't think that they usually when people do something like this, there was some mention of change of control. Well, change of control usually is in a contract for when a company is bought or sold and you don't like who it was sold to. The change of control is the fact that there so many of the executives in Panini are now over at Fanatics.
Yeah.
These are the same executives that Fanatics is now saying were not competent, didn't do a great job for them. So I'm not getting it yet. There must be some subtext that I'm not getting, but uh, or usually there's a provision for a cure that
Yeah.
if you mess up, you get a chance to make it right on some 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the contract. It's very rare that there's just an uh, immediate ending of the contract with the ambiguity of what happens to things that are in process. And so I think that's going to get worked out pretty quickly. And one more
There's
thing, I think Panini is probably doing the right thing to keep moving because
yeah.
if they don't, they lose. If they if they stop everything they're doing, because there is a question of law here, to me, whether or not they can do that. So we'll see how it plays out, Danny. I'm not happy about it. I don't think it's good for the hobby, but I'm not a Supreme Court justice or any other justice.
Well, I think it's fair to point out that the leagues have a vested interest in Fanatics. The players' union has a vested interest in Fanatics. There's investments and partnerships all the way around. So I think it would be naive to not mention that. I just want to throw that out there. I do want to read just real quick the Players Association's announcement. The NFLPA has terminated its trading card agreement with Panini. I mean, they're not mincing words here. Effective immediately, Fanatics has the exclusive right to make NFLPA branded trading cards. This decision has no impact on any individual player's contract agreements with Panini. If you represent players with existing Panini agreement, the NFLPA recommends that you encourage the players to fulfill their contract. I think there's a lot of reading in between the lines there. You mentioned Panini moving forward. Well, one of the models, and we'll certainly touch on this later, to move forward without a license, autographed products become great chase cards. And you do need to get maybe more creative if you have to airbrush the logos. But it's not the first time there have been non-licensed, products out there that have used retired players, individual contract players. Is that their angle that they have to take, other than legal remedy, of course, which is going to be the forefront?
Well, the leagues already think like business people and think about investing in companies and entities and things like that. The Players Association, it's a little bit new for them to think like owners. I mean, they're individual owners of their own brand. They've come together in a licensing entity, but I think they're pretty excited about working with Fanatics and getting a share of the profits of that entity. They don't have that with Fanatics. I mean, with Panini, and so I think they're just eager to get into that. They maybe have seen some early results from what this first year of Fanatics, and thinking, let's accelerate that. Again, the legalities of the contract usually. I heard maybe it was Hobby Hotline earlier this week, the special edition. Contracts can be tight and they can be loose, but if you're the bigger entity, it doesn't matter as much because you have the power. Frankly, most of these licensing agreements are probably pretty one-sided in favor of the licensor. This is the standard agreement, and I'm sure they have outs that the licensee doesn't have. So it probably is a one-sided contract, and yet still there usually is language. There's always language in a contract of what happens, when there's termination, and how it winds down or sunsets. So the terse language there is problematic. It's not. But like I said, Panini is moving forward to think, surely we already have the license for the cards that we have produced, and we can distribute those. Going forward, they may not get cooperation from the Players Association to approve sets or to get autograph and other kinds of agreements in place as well. So it doesn't look good for the future. For the present, it might be that Panini wins, but the win is not very exciting to win, to just get to print, to get to distribute what you already have. I don't like it, but again, I'm not against anybody. I'm in favor of the hobby.
Yeah, Mad City Brew still not fully. I think it's on board or abroad that Fanatics will be good for the hobby. I think it's funny. I don't think anybody is comfortable with how quickly they've moved, in all the different spaces. I think it's interesting. We spoke to a local card shop owner who said that Fanatics has actually been better to deal with than other companies over the past that he's done with over the past 10, 20 years. So it'll be interesting on how Fanatics works with the local card shops, and if they treat them differently than they seem to treat their rivals at the corporate level. Any thoughts on how they're reaching out to the consumer differently than they seem to be reaching out to B2B?
Uh, Fanatics, Mad City Brews comment that it's still not fully aboard that Fanatics will be good for the hobby. The NFLPA is fully on board that Fanatics will be good for them. And then hence, and I think they will be good for the hobby. So the leagues, uh, that's the scary thing. If the leagues join in and say, Panini, we're going to join with the players, and we're gonna terminate your license, maybe in a more, again, they're the more business oriented group. They may, and they have a slightly different contract as well. It's not the same contract. So I think the jury is not out with the Players Association that Fanatics is going to be great for them. And then to to me, that's more important. I think that's more important to them than whether they're good for the hobby. I hope it's good for the hobby.
Yeah, I think we all hope
It's
that.
not good for the hobby to have no football cards this year.
Well, I want that was exactly where I wanted to head. But we do have a third member of our crew this morning. Um, Rich, you're not quite on screen here, but we're glad we have you.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to rejigger this. So give me a second. So nobody really wants to see my face anyway. So.
Well, I said I feel like the third wheel with the hobby guru. Glad to have you, Rich.
No, we got Dr. Jim. I'm still working on getting. Oh, I think I need.
All right.
I don't know what
We'll
this is. This is just in a computer.
But I did want to talk about, and Dr. Becker, exactly what you were just talking about is, are we going to not have football cards? And there just seems like too much money on the line to really miss an entire year. Well, I think everybody's for profit on this.
I'm not trying to make Fanatics mad, but it's in the best interest of the hobby, legalities aside, that Panini proceed and make the best of this awkward and perhaps ambiguous situation. So if they're continuing to send out football cards, that's good for card shops, that's good for distributors, it's good for collectors, investors, flippers, everybody, that there's new cards coming into the pipeline. And not that there's this, it'd be like it'd be like 94, 95 with the baseball strike, where just people had a real bad taste in their mouth, and not every collector came back from that. So I don't want that. I want to keep some flow of cards. And I think this thing may go to, this is the kind of thing where there's injunctions, or temporary restraining orders, things like that. And so all that's being considered. I do know from my legal experience, more from being an expert witness, but arbitration is very different from going to court. And it's also very different from mediation. It's cheaper than going to court with a federal or any kind of a lawsuit, but it's not like mediation where they're trying to bring the parties together. Arbitration is a decision of who's right and who's wrong.
And my understanding is in arbitration, they're choosing A or B. It's not the compromise that you would have in mediation, where there might be a third option.
Well, but there can be settlement. Some things are settled as they get into arbitration. My experience has been that the arbitrators, I think, like, each side will pick an arbitrator, and they together will pick the third arbitrator, which kind of is supposed to be impartial. But usually the arbitrators that are chosen have knowledge in the field. So it's not like picking a venue of a lawsuit that's filed in a certain state or district, and then you get a judge. You don't know what judge you're going to get. You're going to get a judge that's selected. Arbitrators are generally pretty knowledgeable about the subject matter, and that's good. Then we'll have somebody that's not at square one trying to figure out, hey, what's the big deal? It is a big deal, and I'd love to see mediation, and yet the lack of mediation means this relationship is irrevocably broken, and they're not moving forward. It's a question of when.
Absolutely. Well, I think we have
You have the background of my office. I don't know what's going. I haven't angled it, but you can see all the good stuff that's in my office. We have the ComC stuff for that Angela and Stefan keep, and we have some donations. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and I'll be the amorphous voice in the background.
Okay. All right, so we got Uncle UPS today.
We have Uncle UPS.
The cards are talking.
Yes, the cards will be talking. Isn't that great?
Cards.
And I'm going to use one of my favorite lines. I'm sure whatever Dr. Jim has said in the first 20 minutes, I'm going to be like Mickey Mantle after Casey Stengel appeared in Congress in 1958. When they asked him for his opinion after Casey went on a long dissertation about his baseball career, and Mickey deadpanned and said, I agree with everything Casey just said. So I guarantee you I agree with everything Jim just said.
Thanks,
Well, he was talking about how good looking you were. So,
Well, obviously he's missing that part of it. So, no, he's got a very, very pretty wife. We'll leave it at that. And that's a good looking person. Him and I, not so much.
Well, at least I got something going this week. Rich, I wanted to get your thoughts on this week, talking about the Panini and Fanatics lawsuits. I know you've had some views.
Yeah, I will tell you that I went and picked up a donation. You see part of it actually in the thing, and I'm trying to figure out why it's so funky, but I'll figure that another day. At least I see my arm, so I know the camera works.
In the hand.
And
it's thing.
And I went to Triple Cards to pick up a little donation. Very appreciative. And they asked me for my opinion, and my first words to them were, I feel sorry for y'all. Because if this becomes a real issue, it can take football cards years to recover. And one of the people there just said, yeah, Pokemon had a similar problem 2 years ago, and the Pokemon market still hasn't totally recovered from that. And once people get out of the habit of buying football cards, if they do, then you've got the problem of how do you get them back? And they'll come back. But we went through that in 94, 95 with the baseball strike. It took until the home run chase in 98 to get the people to come back. And I'm going to spitball here for a second. And I've been thinking about this. Down the street from the office, literally down the street, is the printing press Fanatics bought. Could you imagine if they surreptitiously ran a late night shift and didn't tell anybody? They've got all the key quarterbacks from this year's draft signed. They're going to do autographs. Could you imagine for opening weekend of the season if they surreptitiously release the first 2023 Topps football product? And it shows up. It's opening weekend. They hand them out at all the stadiums. For the away teams, they make sure the pro shops, everybody gets packs when they walk into the store. And then, the week after that, they release it to the dealers saying, we know that we want to get the release out. Here you go. And as Jim has liked to say in the past, a lot of people in life do something and then say, let's ask for forgiveness later. Well, Fanatics is going to have the license. Why not just do it and just say, hey, ask for forgiveness now. We're going to be your licensor in 3 years anyway.
Well, Danny, you put the statement from the NFLPA up, and it looked to me, because I had heard it, and I don't know that I'd looked at it that carefully, but it looked like the effective immediately was period. And it relates to the first sentence, that they've terminated their relationship, their card agreement with Panini, effective immediately, period. End of thought. Now, then it says Fanatics has the exclusive right to make NFLPA branded cards. To me, that's not immediately. The effective immediately, they're stopping. I don't know that they can jump the gun and say, okay, right now, Fanatics has the exclusive right to make NFLPA branded cards. Now, maybe it does. Maybe if they no longer have an exclusive agreement with Panini, but what Rich is saying, for them to jump in surreptitiously or otherwise, midnight, overnight printing, uh, that would be that's dangerous in terms of the litigation prospects of that, because that sounds a little bit conspiratorial.
Well, and somebody, here, I want to get this comment on here. Fanatics can release items as tops now. Pictures will be from players walking into work in the suits, since tops won't have team logos. There's there is a lot of ways to work around that, and I think they're in the stronger position of having the actual players. It's a lot harder when you don't have the player to just put up a logo of a team, or only deal with young college players on NILs or retired players. So I think Fanatics is in the stronger position there, and I think that's part of the reason that the PA I think made this move, is that they know that Fanatics legally can produce football cards at some level. The other thing is, I wonder if this changes like the Bowman U products and more of the college products for the players who are coming out. Do they push for more college football products and make more deals that way for the next year or two?
Well, they have to put the further squeeze on Panini.
Yeah,
Try to lock in these exclusives with some of the younger, not yet potential NFL stars, the college guys. That's Machiavellian. I mean, it's classic. They want to dominate. They want to be a monopoly without calling it a monopoly. It may not be legally monopoly, but it sure feels like one. Of where they're heading.
Remember that as long as Upper Deck keeps the hockey license, that Fanatics can always say, look, there's a company, they have their hockey license. We do not have a monopoly in trading cards. And there is such a thing as exclusive licenses. I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he used to work for Jim as well, Eddie, and Eddie had a licensed photo company. And the NFL told him one day that they were cutting from 300 to 30 in their licensors, and he was not going to be one of their 30s. And he goes, did you have an antitrust thing? He goes, no. And I said, well, then probably Panini probably doesn't have an antitrust thing either, because it's business, and people are allowed to have exclusives. And I mean, honoring a contract. This is one reason why people get frustrated with Players Association, because they're figuring these guys are making all this money and then they're breaking a contract. So this could actually backfire on the Players Association. And I'm worried about that too, because if it's perceived that players are looking out for more money, then you've got the case of this is what happened in 94, 95, even though the players were right because in what they did to strike, and they were right in 81, but it was still perceived, especially by 94, where the Players Association had banked all the money from the trading cards, and players were getting decent money for not having to play. And, they get perceived as, you guys are millionaires, even though most aren't. Most players aren't. But they get perceived as the rich guy, when they see the big contract signed. And then they say, you guys are wanting more money and breaking contracts. That can be deleterious to the players' interests.
Well, one of the things, and to your point, Rich, the average NFL career is 3.5 years, and the average time for a free agent contract and getting off your rookie contract is between 4 and 6 years. So not everybody's hitting that big payday right away.
In fact, very few do, but the point is, the perception is the ones that do are the ones you hear about. It's always been that way in sports. When in the 40s and 50s, DiMaggio would sign the $100,000 contract, or Musial would sign, or Ted Williams would sign, or Mantle would sign, they all perceived to be, hey, these guys are all making a lot of money. But with the reserve clause, actually very few players were making money, and most of them were working jobs in the off season. Nowadays, your job in the off season is to keep trying to get better and stay in shape.
Keep signing.
Johnny Unitas had a restaurant in Baltimore for years. So 100% true, and it's changed a lot. And I think one of the things we do need to acknowledge is the percentage of income that this really is for the players. In their pocket, I think for most of them, a small piece of their overall earnings. But for the players' associations and the license, it adds up. And we're talking tens of millions of dollars. So I wonder if it's the NFLPA leadership doing what's best for the overall NFLPA. And you have to. I'm pure speculation. Was there any communication with the Fanatics, to try to push this to happen with the NFLPA? I mean, everybody's motivated there.
Who's going to admit that? I mean, now you've got it. Now you got RICO. Basically, there shouldn't be this tortious interference with a contract. But my guess is, if you look at the contract, clearly the NFLP had some outs, some ways to get out of it. And whether it's flimsy, when you're the bigger party in an agreement, you have some might makes right sometimes. And like I said, they've already seen the early returns from what Fanatics has done with Topps and how that's enriched the Players Association. And what they've seen with the overall with baseball, that it's not a secret that Fanatics supposedly offered double what Panini was paying in terms of royalties, and that may not even include the the piece of the action, the equity piece that they have. And so I think the NFLPA is in a hurry to get in on that. And I don't blame them for wanting that, but they need to do it legally.
Well, and that's.
I'm sorry, Danny. And remember, Fanatics has an amazing infrastructure. They own Lids. They own the team stores. They have an infrastructure already set up to distribute. And they've added, I know Rex usually is with us at the show, and Rex talks about how they've added a lot of direct card store accounts. They have the infrastructure to get things out. And there it is. I see on the bottom of the screen, just as I'm talking about Rex. That was good timing, Dan. Either that or you're a mind reader. And but they have the infrastructure to get things out that Panini doesn't. Panini has distributors in the dealer network. Fanatics has some distributors because they have agreements with some of them. I mean, Topps works closely with Dave and Adams for one. So they have some distributorships already, lined up. They have direct accounts to stores. They have direct accounts to Lids. They have direct accounts to the pro shops. How many, that's many more places. You want to grow the hobby 10x. That's a pretty good way of getting stuff more accessible to more people.
Sure. The point I was going to bring up before, and to transition a little bit, is we're talking about the possibility of people making cards without licenses. And for better or for worse, whatever you thought, Brian Gray did that for a lot of years in the hobby. And the news this week that he will no longer be CEO of Leaf has come out. And I think we have to acknowledge what he did without a license. Personally, is a separate story in my relationship with him, but I do think, as far as a hobby rebel or whatever you want to call it, he did show at least a path of how to run a card company without a license. Anybody have thoughts on the Leaf change?
My first thought was that he's about the same age Jim is when Jim sold the company and when Rob Lifson sold REA. And, we've talked about this. You get to about that age, mid-50s, and you say, I've conquered every mountain I want to conquer. I still want to do things, and I want to do it while I'm young enough to enjoy them. And so when somebody asked in some chat I was in, it was either our Hobby News Daily chat or it was in another chat I'm in, and I said, he announced it on a Friday night, and with his age, I think this is a real thing. And I saw him briefly at the National. He did not seem to be quite as energetic at the National as previous years. And, and I think that recharging your batteries is a good idea. Brian's a lifer, by the way. He will be back. What he comes back as, I don't know, but he will be back. He is a card lifer. So I have full confidence we will see him again. Where we see him, that's up to him.
Well, I agree, Rich. He needs to take care of his health. I think he doesn't look as healthy as he did a few years ago. Who does, I suppose? But the thing that's interesting to me, because I do think he probably is a little bit younger than I was, but I also mentioned that I wanted margin. I wanted to get my life back because I was so involved. But my question and it doesn't haunt me because I think I made the right decision, but Brian's going to be thinking about this. How much of Leaf was Brian? And so with Brian not there day to day or being the CEO, maybe he's the chairman of the board and maybe somebody else is running it, but how much will be lost? Something will be lost. How much or what type of loss it is, because he was the force behind Leaf. He talks about a great team. I had a great team, but and I probably did not calculate what the loss would be when I was no longer, when I had sold my company. Now I'd sold it, and they said I was an advisor, but something was lost. It wasn't so much the day to day. It's just that, like I say, some of the decisions that have been made over now 18 years, I wouldn't have made, but I didn't have the insight. So how much of that, if Brian's not there day to day, will he be missed? And I promise you, he'll be missed. It might be huge, and it might be that everything runs pretty smoothly for a long time. But he was the force behind a lot of what they were doing. And so, and it's hard to be. You can be a lifer, but you can feel like you're in prison because you have this great job that you love, but your family and your health could be suffering, and there's you either got to sell out or resign from some of the day-to-day duties. I did not feel I could resign day-to-day duties and kick myself upstairs. I needed to sell and let somebody else call the shots. And I can, I'm still a lifer, but I'm not. I'm on the outside looking in with my old company. And I think Brian's chosen a different approach, and I really hope it works for him.
Jim, I can assure you, when you sold the company, it became a very different place.
Well, of course.
And that, I mean, but you made the decision for what you did the best you could to take care of the employees that were there at the time and to do your best to try to ensure the long-term health. And what you did, it's still there 18 years later. I mean, whether we like all the twists and turns, the fact that it's still there 18 years after you sold the company is a pretty good testament to what you built.
I wanted to bring up something that Dr. Beckett just touched on. Is Brian Gray, my understanding is he resigned. He's no longer CEO, but he's still the owner. I have not seen anywhere where it said he sold the company.
Exactly.
And that's the key difference, right, Dr. Beckett?
And it's very interesting that he's not identified the CEO that he has, quote unquote, handpicked. And so it probably will be somebody that it's obviously somebody known to him and probably somebody that will be known to us. And so the fact that he hasn't mentioned it is allowing this first news to sink in. I'm thinking when I sold the company, the headlines weren't about Peter Goodmanson taking over, or they were about the transaction and here's what's happening. And then later on, there was an announcement of here's the new organizational structure.
Well, the New York Times headline was how much you sold it for. You did make the New York Times.
which was incorrect, but that's
Well, that's the number I always use because that number was printed in a paper. So whether it's incorrect or not, it's a good number for me to use.
well, I promise you it's incorrect, but when it's in the New York Times, what are you going to do? Sue them for a retraction?
Oh, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, and I wanted to also bring up, we were talking about, will there be football cards and will Panini be selling football cards? We spoke to Nick, who runs a local card shop, and he said this week Panini did solicit him to buy football cards that they've printed for this year. So they're still actively selling to dealers. In Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I think he was getting calls from the reps still selling. Now, could this simply be that they, have inventory that by all means they're legally allowed to sell? Is this, them trying to grab as much money as they can while they have product that people, might not normally buy up? I just wonder,
if they don't do that, they automatically lose. I mean, it's like if you have I want to turn left, you want to turn right. What's the compromise? If it's a veto, then you just stay put. Okay. But if I want to go forward and you want me to stop and you say, well, let me think about it, well, then you're not going forward. And so Panini is trusting that they will win in some sort for this year, for this product, that the NFLPA could have filed a restraining order or some kind of an injunction to stop them from doing anything right now, and they didn't do that. They just said the license is terminated effectively immediately. But the already approved, again, I was doing something on one of my other podcasts that's saying the collectors vastly underestimate what it takes to put out a set. And the reason it takes a year, there's not one checkoff, there's multiple checkoffs and approvals by players, by leagues, by photographers, all this kind of stuff, copywriters, all that stuff. And so it takes a long time. That stuff has already been approved. And they already have a licensing guarantee, probably that they've paid in advance for 2023. And so it's unreasonable. I mean, again, in the long run, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this. In the long run, Panini loses out to Fanatics because Fanatics has the license. We already know that, whether it's this year, next year, the year after, that's where it's going. But Panini should win in terms of this year's product. I think that the Player Association is on shaky ground for saying you got to stop right now and dump everything you have in the ocean. I don't think even if there's an arbitration, regardless of whether it's mediation, almost always there's some, you're done, but sell what you have, don't print anymore, or some accommodation for that, because otherwise it's just not fair.
Well, first of all, who would ever throw baseball cards into the ocean? That's never happened.
That's only been done once, apparently, and infamously.
Yeah, well, yeah, it'd be interesting if Panini's base cards become 52 tops. My question is there's been a lot of people say overprinting, or we're in, heading into a second junk wax period. Could contraction be a good thing, that there's less sets overall? Could competition push the quality of the product better?
Well, in the lawsuit of Fanatics against Panini, they're talking about how poorly Panini did, and yet when you see the dramatic increase in cards produced in the last few years from Panini, how they've quote unquote grown the category, to me there's a question whether they've grown it too much, but they've printed to demand. And so Fanatics may complain about that, but are they going to lower production? that doesn't seem to be the way they do things. They're going to broaden distribution. They bought a printer. They're not going to print less. I think they're going to print more, but they're going to distribute it more widely. And if they do, then that's hopefully how they can grow the category in a way that's responsible.
It's funny because I got into a little conversation on the Net 54 message boards with somebody complaining about the National, how they wanted to see, the National start catering to people with $5,000 or $25,000 in their pocket at all time. And I pointed out that if Fanatics, has, said we want to 10x the hobby, you may 10x the money that way, but you're not going to 10x the hobby that way. So as Jim points out, Fanatics, it can do much better distribution than Panini ever could. And that's your whole ball game, is they can start from the beginning and they can do the term I hate, which is synergy, but they have the synergy to do the entire distribution channel. They don't have to stop and say, we need help from you or from you or from you. They can say, we can do this all. And so that actually makes the market more efficient. And they know what they can do and what they can't do. And like, for example, last year, they didn't want to reinvent the wheel when they did the MVP, I'll call it the MVP promotion or whatever it was. And they knew my employer, ComC, had a system set up where they could process cards. And so they sent that to ComC rather than having to recreate a wheel for themselves, because there was already the mousetrap already set up. They're doing a great job. And by the way, both Dr. Jim and I know several people at Panini. Several of them are our teammates at Beckett, and we have the utmost respect for them. So this is not a slag on anybody at Panini. I'm looking at a whole new world. And if you're willing to look at a whole new world, this is a great idea for Fanatics to do better marketing, and then better targeted marketing. I was hearing on some chat that, whether it was the show you were doing last night, how when Anthony Volpe made his major league debut, and as a Yankee fan, I wish he'd be hitting more than 217. They talked about, the Fanatics and the patch and, the rookie year patch and all that. They're going to do things. Not everything's going to work, but they're going to do things that should generate interest in the market.
I think the biggest thing that they're doing is they're finding very subtle ways to get into the ether of children's lives, where it's actually crossing their screen. I've got two 12-year-old boys, and they said, "Dad, there's a baseball card commercial." Or my son went to buy a hat and said, "Dad, they were selling baseball cards in lids." And so for them to notice and for them to see it, I think that's a good thing for kids to be exposed to it, as opposed to something else, if we want the future of the hobby to go forward. Maybe that's too corny, but I think that's been a positive.
No, I'm with you. I have a 5-year-old great nephew who thankfully has so far, it's Beckham 1, cancer nothing, and he had a visit from Daniel Murphy, who's now officially retired for the second time, while he was in rehab. And I would pull through the donations and I'd pull him out, or if I'd see him in the value boxes at a reasonable price, I pulled out Daniel Murphy cards for him. Well, he came to visit with his mom and his younger brother about a month ago now. And he's 5 years old. His favorite thing is all the cards I gave him. So he lives in Jacksonville. And I apologize for anybody who will get upset, but as I go through donation bins, or value bins, and they're cheap, if I see Trevor Lawrence cards for him, since he's the starting quarterback for Jacksonville, they're getting pulled for him. And I think I'm creating a collector at the age of 5. And if I've created a collector at the age of 5, and this is just an accident of timing, is if he gets the collecting gene in him at the age of 5, he'll have it with him for his whole life in some way. And I think, Danny, you're right. And that's what I'm adding to that, is that if the kids get into collecting, just like the overproduced era kids did, just like the kids of Dr. Jim's generation or my generation did with the schoolyard, or we traded cards and we did all that. You get that into your blood at a young age. It doesn't get out there. It may get out for a while, and then the 20-year rule kicks in, and then you come right back in. So this is the best ecosystem you can have. You get them when they're young. Let them do college. Let them do cars. Let them do, as Nick Redwine used to say, cars, cuties, and college. Let them do the three things, the three C's. And then they come back and they bring their kids to Nick's store before he sold out. Nick would see the parents come back with the kids. Yeah, oh yeah, I remember you. And yeah, my kid wants to collect cards. And he truly had a neighborhood card store. And the kids loved being at a store like that. And that's the thing. You build the hobby from the ground up. And what we're saying is that it looks like Fanatics is doing, for all we talk about the rich stuff, we need more of Michael Rubin going to Burbank, seeing a kid pull Devin Booker cards, getting a hold and getting her a Devin Booker jersey. We need more of that type of stuff where everybody can say, hey, if I do this, I may get something good. Or look, I'm going to get something good by doing, and it's not that expensive. And most parents can afford $1 or $2 for cards. Jim, how many people do you think were at Kyle's show last weekend?
Hundreds. I mean, it was
over 1,000
dealers, and so probably could be 1,000.
They have paid of over 1,000, and with the dealers, they probably had 1,250 They had probably 1,250 people in 2 days at a card store, at a card show, without having to overproduce it. Without having over publicizing it. Kyle and his team have great. But they had 1,200 people in the room, and thankfully the air conditioning was working. The only thing hotter than this conversation was the temperature at DFW Airport yesterday at 110. And they drew 1,200 people in a room over 2 days. That's pretty good.
Was it a younger group?
There was a lot of younger people there. I had a great Saturday and a miserable Sunday, but that was because the people don't understand. The people on Saturday know how to dig through my boxes. The ones on Sunday are more showcase people, and I sold a lot of cards from the showcase on Saturday too, so I didn't have quite the same stuff. And there, look at it. There's a confirmation of what we were talking about and when it is Fort Worth, except it's by the airport, so it's not Fort Worth like an hour and a half away.
It's very close to the airport.
Very close to the airport.
So, Dr. Beckett, let me ask you, for the average collector consumer, we're talking about a lot of C-level conversations and management shakeups and lawsuits. For the person who just collects cards, at a more common level, is there an immediate impact or anything that is of worry, or is this really big picture corporate, litigation?
Let me answer it two ways. Number one, I think we have a very sharp audience today and every Saturday that are a heavy dose of industry insiders that do care about the C-level stuff because they think big, and they're lifers, most Hobby Hotline listeners. But the average person, I think, is going to be concerned if there's no new football cards for the next 6 months. That's catastrophic to me. If there's, and I'm not talking about Topps Now, a card here and a card there, or little box sets or things like that, but a major wax foil cases, boxes with some great chase cards for football, that would be really bad. And so that affects everybody, and it requires the leadership of those companies and those entities to set their pride aside and maybe even greed and think what's best for everybody. And for this year, I think it's to allow to not put an immediate plug on Panini. Going forward, Panini already knew their days were numbered, and collectors have adjusted to that. And I don't think it's affected Panini negatively. The people are, oh, I'm not going to buy Panini anymore because they're a lame duck. No, I think Panini was doing fine, but they're not doing fine if they can't distribute the cards and finish out the year. I think with work they have already in progress. I mean, a lot of the work for card companies is before the printing. It's not in the distribution, it's in the preparation and all that stuff. So I hope cooler heads will prevail.
I will also say that, when I've talked to a couple of our former Becca teammates who have boomeranged back to Panini, and doing product development is such a different world for them. They can look at a product, they can start it, and then they may not touch a product for 4 months. It is a process, and then it's a process. How this is the expression goes, how the sausage is made is something that would be, if I did at this point in my life, it would be a major learning experience. I'd probably go home and say, why did I ever want to do this at this age? Because it is such a learning curve. And I think doing products are one of the most important process. It's the process. And I am fascinated by process. But I wonder how many steps are really involved in making a product. I'm going to bring up some ancient history here, but I'm still convinced that people in 1981 said the errors the card companies made with Fleer and Donruss were deliberate. Look at it was a simpler word. You didn't have inserts in that day. But I think it was like September or October, they got permission to make sets. They had them on the market 4 or 5 months later. Think about what they had to go through in a simpler time to get a product into the market. They had to rush things. And rushing things is never a good sign. And so you don't want Topps to rush, Fanatics Topps to rush the production of their 2023 issues either. You would hope that if they think they're going to do something, they at least have stuff somewhat planned already. Because as you point out, as Jim points out, and as the store owners pointed out, or the reps at the store pointed out, you want to make sure there's a continuous stream of product. And, several of those first round quarterbacks have already been anointed the starting quarterbacks for their team. They're going to come out as they're going to start the season with the hottest players of the year. If they're going to start the season with the hottest players of the year, you kind of want them in their professional jerseys. You don't want them anymore in their Alabama or their Georgia or, their Notre Dame or whatever college it is. You want them in the Ravens jersey. Well, actually, that's Lamar Jackson. But you want them in their Ravens jerseys or their Giants jersey or their Patriots jerseys. You don't want them in the college jersey anymore.
I mean, Bryce Young is going to have a rookie card in who knows what year. And I think that's to Rich's point, for people who are chasing it. One of the questions is, Dr. Becker, you had talked about earlier the turnaround time. Rich, you were talking about this of production from, when they want to create a set till it can actually come out. Does the leagues, the Players Association, all being involved in bed with Fanatics, smooth that process out, speed it up, get approvals quicker, work together better?
Probably. I mean, it certainly shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't hurt, but again, it isn't automatic. These approvals, they're just like hockey's a different situation, but they don't necessarily want to show blood or fights and things like that. So there's some things they're looking for, and Paninis and Fanatics and Topps of the world understand what the sensitivities of the leagues and the players associations are. But there's still a lot of steps. There's more steps and more levels of approval than we realize. But surely Fanatics should have an advantage when they have equity partners that
Right.
they've got even more reason to be pleasing to their partners. And it's not adversarial. They're not trying to slip something by. They're trying to work together. I like that. Panini's beef is that you never gave us the chance, or you never said, hey, Fanatics has come at us with this kind of proposal. Are you willing to do that? They just did it.
I remember the story of Freddie Freeman when he became a free agent with the Atlanta Braves. He wanted to stay in Atlanta. Atlanta made an offer to his agent, evidently, that was turned down. Atlanta went and signed Matt Olson immediately. Freddie Freeman was caught off guard, never told his agent he wanted to stay in Atlanta. Ended up with the Dodgers, but ended up firing his agents because the information wasn't passed along of what he might have been able to sign for to stay where he wanted. And, I look at Panini, did they give one offer and never get a call back after that? And is that dirty pool, as John Newman would say? Yeah. All right. Rich, your box has been legendary.
I know. It's almost as good as he's running his show, but it's almost as legendary as our friend Bo Spencer Thompson's box 13 from his old video days. And it's fun. I mean, I'm a disembodied voice right now. And
yeah. Mike Junkwax here said he had just hopped on and was very curious about what was happening.
Tell him I had trouble I had trouble signing on, and just to get on, I didn't want to fiddle with the camera too much. So once I saw we had a background of boxes, I said, that's good enough.
Well, this is actually the Panini warehouse right now, as they're shipping stuff out as quick as possible. Last thoughts, wrap it up. Rich, Brian Gray stepped down. Everybody's in a lawsuit. Thoughts for the week. Where are we headed? What's next
Shohei
week?
Ohtani, how much money did he lose by his elbow injury? I mean, he's still the best hitter in baseball, but what made him special to collectors was not just hitting, but also the pitching. The fact that he was really the first great two-way player since Babe Ruth in 1919, and then a little bit in 1920. And like Ruth, he was leading the league in homers, and he was pitching very well. And Ruth was playing the outfield when he wasn't pitching. Shohei was playing DH, and DH does not affect your pitching arm really. But, he's going to get a lot of money as a DH. The question is, how much more would he have gotten if he had stayed a pitcher? And his arm wasn't going out like that. And so,
Rich, he's not going to get 500 million. He's only going to get 400 million.
Right.
Yeah, I feel really sorry for him. That's still generational wealth.
I'm just saying, he's must see. When you go to the ballpark, I mean, you got Trout. Presumably they may or may not be together going forward, but he's still a great talent. And I wouldn't give up on his pitching. It's possible that he's got to sit out a year, do his Tommy John again, perhaps, and then maybe in 2 years he's back pitching.
And the thing is, as we learned with Bryce Harper, you can continue to be a hitter even coming back from Tommy John surgery. Maybe not quite as much power, but you still can hit, and you can still hit the ball well. So I did want to bring up Shohei this week. And, we got college football seasons beginning today, week 0, as they call it. NFL season's 2 weeks away. My card show is next week. Dallas card show's in 2 weeks. It's a busy time.
And those are all the secondary stories.
And those are all secondary stories. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah. But I mean, that's all the more reason why what we've spent a lot of time on about the NFLPA striking now right at the beginning of football season, when it ought to be such positive news about what's going on and the movement of some of these running backs, and who knows what's going to happen this year and who's going to emerge of this next level of quarterbacks. And now we have this negativity. So I hope it gets resolved, and quickly.
We all hope it gets resolved. As you once said in some meeting we were having, nobody likes getting sued.
Nobody likes getting sued. Thank you, Rich. Good note to end on.
I come from a family full of attorneys, so.
But this had to do with.
I love that.
And by the way, we were absolutely correct when we talked about Howard Sports Collectibles and their PVC in the sheets. And when you see these sheets with PVC nowadays, you can tell. So we were absolutely right when we talked about the dangers of PVCs in sheets. We weren't even trying to be negative. We were just saying this is a real issue.
We should have fast forwarded 20 years and Talk about cards being baked, prices being baked in.
Yeah, literally.
Well, guys, I appreciate episode 261. This is probably the most news I've had in one episode, and so I hope we steered the bus and kept it on the road today. Dr. Beckett,
Good, Danny. Thank you.
thank you. Rich,
The
we
legendary
appreciate you.
boxes say thank you.
And Uncle Thing, the hand that comes in.
The occasional hand, yes, hi.
Yes. Well, we're going to hit the outro. To everybody in the comments, thank you. We got up at one point, I think we had close to 80 people in here. So a lot of interest, and we appreciate it. Have a good one.